Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
My guest today, Dr. Eric Maisel, has written more than 50 books. His topics include the meaning of life and life purpose, mental health, and critical psychology. He writes a blog for Psychology Today called Rethinking Mental Health. He's also written the book Helping Survivors of Authoritarian Parents, Siblings, and Partners, a Guide for Professionals, and several articles in Psychology Today titled What You Can Expect from an Authoritarian. Obviously, he seemed like a great fit for the conversation today. And we'll get into defining terms like authoritarian here in just a few minutes with Dr. Maisel. Talking about psychology, there is a series at the Great Courses Plus. It's taught by Dr. Thad Polk. It's called Shocking Psychological Studies and the Lessons They Teach. When the mental health profession did some really sketchy stuff on people, child experiments, the famous Stanford prison experiment, ethical challenges that remain within the mental health profession. It's a really candid look at mental health, the past versus the present when it comes to psychology. Now, if you're in the mood for something different, you ought to check out the series called Mind-Blowing Science. It's actually a partnership between the Great Courses Plus and Scientific American. They talk about everything from brain exercises to our search for intelligent life to the dinosaurs. The Great Courses Plus, it streams right into your life, your computer, tablet, phone via the Great Courses Plus app. Thousands of different lectures on so many fascinating subjects. And today you get free access to their entire library by using my special URL. So start your free trial at thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. And now my conversation about authoritarians and cult leaders. Dr. Eric Maisel is a creativity coach and a retired family counselor. Did I say that right, Dr. Maisel?
Family therapist, that's right.
Can you, for the audience, kind of give me a background, just your resume, kind of what you do and how you do it?
Sure. Born in the Bronx, grew up in Brooklyn, grew up in a religious neighborhood, half practicing Jews, half practicing Catholics. All of that was important, instrumental in my growing up and thinking about things. And I've been working as a creativity coach for the last 30-plus years. And also as an activist in an area called critical psychology or critical psychiatry. And I've been writing about authoritarians. I write for the Good Men Project on authoritarians. I have a Thursday column with them called Authoritarians in the Family. And I've done probably 30 or 40 blog posts for Psychology Today on different aspects of authoritarians and especially authoritarians in the family.
Do you see an influx of religious thinking in the psychiatric and mental health profession? Are people sort of informing their psychiatric diagnoses and treatments?
It seems to be coming in everywhere. It's like this resurgence. I don't know if it's a cyclical thing in human affairs, the religion has to come back. It's like if you remember Camus' novel, The Plague, the way it ends with the narrator saying, "The rats always return for the edification of mankind." It feels like religion has to keep returning for the edification of mankind in its negative way. I see it all over the place. I kind of watch for atheists in the military and how being an atheist in the military is such a difficult matter, how religiosity is rearing its ugly head in the military. I see it in existentialism, which is in one of my fields. I grew up being interested in existentialism.
Now, define existentialism as you understand it for the audience.
It's a tradition which demands personal responsibility from human beings. It's one of the philosophies that it grew up in. The pre-Socratics were existentialists. So the early Greeks were among the first to say there are no gods and we must take personal responsibility. We have to don the mantle of meaning maker and make our own meaning and assign our own life purposes and all of that. So it's a tradition that's many thousands of years old, but it didn't come back until roughly Nietzsche in the late 19th century and his writings. And then we had a whole slew of writers, all of whom are probably familiar to your listeners, Kafka and Orwell and Sartre and Camus, and they were all writers who were saying essentially the same thing: you have to take responsibility for your own life. I started reading them as a child, my early teens. I grew up in the era of French existentialism of Camus and Sartre. They impressed me. They struck me as saying true things. And so I've been tracking existentialism all of this time. I've just recently written a book called Lighting the Way, which is really an updated version of existentialism. It introduces a philosophy of life I've been developing that I call Kirism, Kirism, which is essentially an updated existentialism, talking about how to think about personal responsibility in our contemporary times. So this has been of interest to me for a long time. And to circle back around to what I was going to say, I presented at an existential psychotherapy Congress or conference in London some years ago. I went primarily, I was in London anyway, but I went to the Congress primarily because there are two threads in existentialism. There's atheistic existentialism and theistic existentialism. Kierkegaard's in the latter camp. There are a whole slew of existentialists who believed in God and a whole slew who didn't. So one could be one kind or the other. And I was wondering where in the 2000s existentialism was. Was it more theistic or atheistic nowadays? And it was almost all theistic. All the presentations at this Congress were about awe and grandeur and stuff that were metaphoric equivalents of God hunting, God searching. So to circle back around to your original question, the religiosity seems to be creeping in everywhere, whether it's the military or in existentialism or in psychiatry, wherever we look, it's creeping back.
The notion of self-generated purpose, that's something I had to sort of re-examine once I left the faith in my own life. I'm reminded of a quote by ex-pastor Dan Barker. He said, asking someone, if there is no God, what purpose is your life? And it's like asking, if there is no master, whose slave should I be? Absolutely.
And one of the things I try to explain in my books and my work with clients is the movement from the purpose of life, which is a 1,000-year-old metaphor, one that's harmed us, to our life purpose choices, from life purpose to the plural, life purposes. I don't believe there is a purpose to life. I believe there are only our life purpose choices, or to put that more simply, the things we decide are important. We have to decide what's important. I think we actually have to identify those things. Most people have never made a list of what they consider important. I think making that list is one of the first steps to being the person we would like to be. And then, this is a very simple idea, but consulting that list, actually getting your life purposes onto your daily to-do list, as opposed to just all of our errands and responsibilities and duties and tasks. Everybody knows what their daily to-do list looks like, and it has nothing to do with their life purposes. It just has to do with making a buck or getting the kids to school or whatever it has to do with. So there's a big switch to be made from the purpose of life and hunting for that and seeking it to staying put and identifying for oneself what one's life purpose choices are. Similarly, exactly the same idea, there's no meaning to seek. Meaning seeker, we've been talking about seeking meaning for thousands of years. There's only meaning to make. And actually, we can't even make it. All we can try to do is coax it into existence because it's recalcitrant. Meaning is merely a certain kind of psychological experience, and it comes and goes. And so we can't have all the meaning we hope we can have, and we can't have all the meaning that the metaphor of the meaning of life seems to imply that we can't have that. We can only have occasional experiences of meaning. It's a very mature understanding of life to understand that we can only have occasional experiences of meaning.
Dr. Maisel, this provides a segue into authoritarianism and sort of cult thinking. In your experience as a family therapist, did you find that many people were sort of spoon-fed their life purpose? It's a hand-me-down, right? How you think, how you vote, how you worship, who you are. You must have seen quite a bit of that.
The pundits who write in this field, there are no real statistics on this, but the pundits who write in this field have the feeling that about 25% of the population is authoritarian in nature. That means that just about everybody is going to come into contact with a close authoritarian, whether it's a father or a mother or a sibling or a mate or the church leader or the scout leader or the teacher or the mentor. We're going to come into contact with authoritarians. So to answer your question simply, yes, most people have been negatively affected by an authoritarian in their life. And what that means is they've been treated cruelly, just to say it simply. It's not just about belief system or being in a cult. It's the way the victim of authoritarian wounding is treated, and that's cruelly. There seems to be, and we could wring our hands and rack our brains about why this is the case, but it seems to be that a sizable portion of the population wants to punish other people. That's our president, that's most authoritarians. It's not just that they want people to follow them, but they want to punish people. I don't know where that comes from, but that's who they are. And so most people have had the experience of being cruelly and unjustly punished by somebody in their life. And that produces lifelong consequences, lifelong negative consequences that are very hard to deal with. Consequences like indecisiveness and anxiety, perpetual anxiety, and a kind of bedrock confusion about how to live. So there's lots of healing involved. That's why I call it authoritarian wounding. It's really wounding. And there's lots of healing involved to get over having been the victim of an authoritarian.
I want to come back to wounding. How would you differentiate the terms authority and authoritarian?
Well, authoritarian is kind of a technical word, so let me back up a little and talk a little bit about it. In the 1950s, as a response to World War II, sociologists and psychologists, primarily at the University of Berkeley, started looking at something they call the authoritarian personality. So that's the technical authoritarian we're talking about. That person that was examined in the 1950s. Adorno is the name most usually associated with that phrase, the authoritarian personality. And that authoritarian personality has certain qualities, and we could go through many of them, but there are many qualities, including narcissism, intrusiveness, cruelty, setting rules for other people but not following the rules yourself, etc. There are probably roughly a dozen qualities of the authoritarian personality, one of which is getting into bed with religion. That's one of the qualities of the authority. It's not about believing per se. It's important to make this distinction. It's about using religion as another cover for punishing people and lording authority over people. Just to give you a simple example, Mussolini, who was a devout atheist, nevertheless had all of his kids baptized in the Catholic Church so as to get in bed with the Catholic Church, so as to solidify his power. So one of the features of the authoritarian personality is to get into bed with religion. But this is all by way of saying there is a picture, there is a cluster of characteristics that's come to be known as the authoritarian personality, and that's different from authority. That's different from legitimate authority, somebody who's been voted into office, or somebody who we follow because we agree with their belief system. There's legitimate authority, and then there's this authoritarian personality whose main desire is to grab power and to punish.
I'm interested in the God figures in fundamentalist religion. I often call the Christian church the battered bride of Christ. I see some abusive language in there. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But essentially, God is saying, You're born unworthy. You have no worth without me. You get your identity from me. If you leave me, I will hurt you. This is very much the language of an abuser, correct?
Sure, and stoning adulterers and all this, and slavery. You know, slavery is condoned in the Bible. That's just cruelty. We could say lots of things about what slavery is, but the main thing is barbarian cruelty. So yeah, just to nod my head in agreement, I believe all religion is a betrayal of our common humanity. You know, it's very straightforward. There's no loopholes in that for me. For someone to, and also the religions that don't include gods, if they have orthodoxy and dogma, I'm not for them. So that includes Buddhism and Taoism and Eastern religions that have orthodoxy. I don't believe that there is a way that includes necessarily meditation or anything in particular. All of these things are for us to decide. So for me, all religions, whether they're God-based or not God-based, are a betrayal of our common humanity, because it's someone telling me and you that they know something that I know they can't know. I know they can't know what happened before the Big Bang. I know they're just making things up, and you know they're just making things up, and I don't feel inclined to let them get away with it.
So, Dr. Maisel, let's say a dogmatic religion has been the background of your formative years. Yep. Are you then primed to be attracted to an authoritarian in your relationships, marriage, politics, etc.?
Darn, but you are. It's a shame because you're not wanting to, but you are, because you've been so weakened and you've lost so much power in that interaction. I mean, here's this little kid being, provided with these strict rules and these beatings and this and this that. Of course you're going to be weakened. And so it's quite natural that you're going to turn to powerful figures to fill some void or some need. It's really unfortunate because people in that position understand what they're doing to an extent. They half understand that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. It also causes them to fall prey to addictions and what have you, because while they're doing what they don't want to be doing, namely being with another authoritarian, they also have to medicate themselves with drugs or alcohol to deal with the situation that they've put themselves in. So to make that long story short, yes, we see that the victims of authoritarians end up in a serial way being with authoritarians much of their lives until they finally, if they get lucky, turn a corner.
Are there other psychological mechanisms in place? I mean, let's just say I'm a cult leader, right? I'll be some charismatic guy who says I've got the keys to life, the universe, and everything. And yep. I sell this snake oil convincingly. There are certain types of people who gravitate to a guy like me or a cult leader. And many of them seem to take real joy and comfort in abdicating themselves from their own responsibility and let somebody else do their thinking for them. Am I getting that wrong?
Absolutely. No, you have it right. Let me piggyback on that. In the authoritarian literature that I was talking about from the 1950s, the folks who were doing the investigating were actually more looking at what they called the authoritarian follower rather than the authoritarian leader. Somehow they had the idea that authoritarian leaders like Hitler were transparent in who they were. But it was much less clear who all those Germans were who followed Hitler. How could those 100 million men and women follow him? So who were these authoritarian followers? And so they concluded that the authoritarian followers had the sorts of qualities that you just described. Sexual attraction, need for this mythology, this myth-making, a superstitious nature, etc. There are a whole set of qualities. In my investigating, I think there's a double thing going on here. I think authoritarian followers are, on the one hand, followers. But on the other hand, they're pint-sized authoritarian leaders who just don't have the power that you, the cult leader, have. So they're hungry to be authoritarian leaders themselves, and they demonstrate all of those mean qualities in their family. So they may be meek, and the authoritarian follower may be meek in the world, but a monster at home. So I think when we think about this authoritarian personality, we have to think of a mixed bag thing where someone can be both a follower and a leader simultaneously.
I'm reminded of that Cassandra Clare quote, or it's attributed to Cassandra Clare, nobody thinks they're a villain in their own story. Do you think this is considered a noble attitude among these mini authoritarians?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't think that they are thinking that way personally. I don't think they think it's noble. I think they're just satisfying some need to repeat myself, some need to punish, some need to be cruel. It's kind of funny. When I was growing up, I would have been the first to say I don't believe in the metaphor or the idea of good and evil. It's just not what a rational, science-minded kind of kid would buy. Now I'm not quite so sure that I don't believe in ideas like good and evil, and I'm not quite sure that some people aren't really mean-spirited in a deep way. It's not that they're thinking about being a leader per se, or a ruler per se, or a god per se, but rather that they have some need to harm others. And as I say, you and I could spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out where that need would come from. But I think that there is that pressing need to harm others in a lot of people.
If we see the malleability of language, I mean, evil and good could be descriptive terms, right? I mean,
that's right, and that's why I'm troubled by that language. I grew up as a student of language analysis. My first degree was in philosophy. I studied the British linguistic philosophers. I know how to make use of language. I know what language does. I'm a student of Orwell. I know that peace can be war and war can be peace. So I agree with you that good and evil are very difficult words to use sensibly. So I think I'm really just, expressing a kind of feeling as opposed to really wanting to use those words, because I know how slippery those words are.
We can extract the sort of supernatural connotation, right? Because the narrative used to be, if evil happened, it's because of an evil force. There's a spiritual membrane informing. But I think we can describe, a child abuser, that's evil. Genocide is evil. I think we can probably get away with that, don't you?
Yeah, and I write a lot about particular vision of personality that I have. I see personality as made up of three constituent parts: original personality, formed personality, and available personality. And just for the sake of what I'm about to say, just want to focus on original personality. That is the way we come into the world. Psychology and psychiatry has nothing to say about that and no interest in it, primarily because it's not knowable. But everybody who's had kittens or puppies or kids knows that every creature comes into the world already itself. Every creature is already somebody. So, is it possible that some percentage of our species can come into the world without a conscience? Who knows? I'm not positing that as a truth or a fact, but just as a query, because it does seem like some people just don't seem to have a conscience. Did they lose it, or did they never have it? Freud has a lot to say about the superego. Again, this is another subject we could talk about a lot. But there must be something to the idea that we come into the world somebody already. Certainly maybe a little smarter or less smart than the next person, but maybe already a little sadder or less sad than the next person, or a little this or a little that than the next person. And one of the places we may come into the world with is without a conscience. It's a possibility.
That's a whole other show, isn't it? The whole nature and nurture conversation.
A whole other show, but it's an important question, because contemporary psychiatry and psychology pays that no attention, and it ought to, because if you came into the world a little sadder than the next person, then you don't have the mental disorder of depression. You have a certain quality or characteristic that's a lifelong challenge, but it's not a disorder. It's who you came into the world as.
Is there someone on this earth more dangerous than, or more frightening perhaps, than the sociopath, someone who can operate without empathy?
These people without conscience who want to punish everyone also find their way up ladders. That's one of the things they're very good at. They climb ladders and they get to the top and they exert power. And then we who are going about our business have to suffer them.
So is there, I'm looking from the position of the civilian. But if I see someone gravitate to an authoritarian, I don't necessarily see someone, perhaps they're doing it subconsciously, but I don't necessarily see someone who consciously wants to harm others. Quite frankly, some of them seem to gravitate to a savior figure who just says, I'm going to solve all your problems. I'm going to take care of you. You will be protected.
But disagree with them and see what happens. I think that's the acid test. The second you disagree with them, you'll see the light go out of their eyes and a certain snarl take up their whole personality.
That's my
belief. You've seen it.
Yeah.
So they're so loving around their dog. Himmler was loving around his dog, or we have all these stories about all these Nazis who love their dogs and love this and love that, and was great with the grandkids. That doesn't fool me for one split second. I think that right underneath that veneer is an awful lot of hatred.
So it's a conditional love. As long as you validate me, you're in my in-group, it's okay, it's all nice and pleasant. But
it's interesting. It's a conditional love, but it's also a love that you can't really acquire. They don't really love. Many of my clients, many of the readers of my books have said things to me like, I did every darn thing he said I should do. Every single thing, and then he would change the rules. If I was supposed to show up 5 minutes before dinner, and I did, I'd get hit because I didn't show up 10 minutes before dinner. There was no way to win. So I think it's something different from conditional love. I think it's actually no love at all. It's sort of like getting in bed with religion. I think it's getting in bed with love language, but not actually loving.
But Dr. Maisel, if I see, let's call it an abused spouse, who, for a host of reasons, is in a relationship with an authoritarian. Are you saying that the one who's been sort of crushed under boot emotionally, perhaps even physically, who's locked in this authoritarian model, is also in some way a mini authoritarian?
Could be. No, I'm not saying that that's a generalization. I'm not saying that the victims of authoritarians are many authoritarians. Some become that, and they are mean to their own children and hate that. They still have a conscience. Just to use loose language, that's a differentiating factor between the victim of an authoritarian and the authoritarian leader or the authoritarian follower. That victim tends to still have, or at least those victims who communicate to me, still have a conscience. That doesn't mean that they don't act poorly, but they know that they're acting poorly. They hate it that they do the same things to their kids that their parents did to them. They actually do not like it that they're doing that. But that isn't to say that all victims of authoritarians are in some sense mini authoritarians. I don't mean to say that.
So that's an important distinction. I just wanted to draw a circle around it. The people who rally toward these charismatic cult leader type figures are not necessarily in the same camp as those who are sort of locked into an abusive situation with an authoritarian.
No, there's probably, a spectrum or continuum as with so many other things. Or maybe it may be more bimodal than a spectrum. It may be that difference between self-awareness and conscience on the one hand and lack of self-awareness and lack of conscience on the other hand.
More with my special guest, psychotherapist, teacher, life coach, author, and atheist Eric Maisel. We'll continue after this. I'm talking here with a mental health professional, psychotherapist. He's a teacher, he's a life coach, and someone who has written extensively for publications like Psychology Today about authoritarians, Dr. Eric Maisel. If you were to describe authoritarians in a few sentences, if you were to give me some examples, I really want to try to color inside the lines on this one.
Well, it's about a set of qualities, so it's not easy to describe or define in a sentence. It's more about a cluster of qualities that we see, and it's that punishing quality. It's a certain kind of intrusiveness. They're always in your business. It's the setting of rigid rules, which are rigid for other people but not for them. They violate their own rules as whimsically as they like, but you can't violate their rules. That kind of hypocrisy. As I say, there are probably somewhere between 12 and 20 characteristic. Narcissism is one, grandiosity is another, superstitiousness, an awful lot of, astrology this or that or the other thing, making decisions based on superstition. As I say, there's probably 12 to 20 qualities that define the authoritarian, and it's one of those, the famous Justice Potter line about I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. It's hard to define the authoritarian personality, but we know it when we see it, especially if we can be a fly on the wall. We can't spot this person in a crowd, because in a crowd, another face of the authoritarian personality is caring about what other people think. That's really important to mention. I'm glad I reminded myself to mention it, because they often want to blend in. That's why they're in the march. That's why they're following, because they want to be shoulder to shoulder with other people and not look different from other people.
Forgive the interruption. Is that another form of manipulation? You are emulating what a conscience-driven person might be in order to get their allegiance?
Absolutely. And it's also another piece of that deep denial that's going on somewhere inside of their being about the truth. This has got me off on a different thought, but let me just go there for a second.
Take your time.
Social psychologists run really interesting experiments. I'm sure you know that the Milgram experiment about teachers and learners and how many people are willing to shock other people with electricity if they're not learning correctly and all of that. But the experiment that comes to mind right at this split second that's of interest is the famous line experiment, where a subject is put in a room with 20 other, so to speak, subjects, but in fact the other 20 people in the room are confederates of the experimenter. And all of those confederates are supposed to say the following thing. They're shown two lines, one of which is twice as long as the other. And they're all supposed to say that the lines are of equal length, when the lines clearly are not of equal length. And the test is to see if this one actual subject will say, when it's his turn, yes, the lines are of actual length, or no, what are you talking about? What's going on in this room? The lines are clearly of different lengths. Time after time, to the 90%, 95% level, the actual subject in that room is going to say that the lines are of equal length. That's how scared we are to tell the truth, even the truth of our own eyes. So as I say, I've gotten off on a tangent here, but one of the reasons that people march together is that they really hate standing out. They hate standing on their own 2 feet. They hate speaking in their own voice. That's why, I'm sure you know this, the number one phobia in the world is not fear of flying or fear of bridges or fear of spiders. It's fear of speaking, fear of public speaking. It's the number one phobia. People are scared of standing up and speaking their truth. So that's why they want to be in these groups, and that's why they want to follow somebody who's powerful.
I'll have to go look up the study. I don't want to be irresponsible and sort of unquoting it, but it was something I had heard about teenagers who'd been surveyed about their greatest fear, and their greatest fear was not death. Their greatest fear was being embarrassed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's what I'm not sure. Well, we were talking about the qualities of the authoritarian. That's one of their top qualities: is fear of embarrassment. One of the times they most punish their children is if their children embarrass them in public. That will get you the worst beating. Is embarrassing the parents in front of the flock or the neighbors or in public.
Is that a masking or a compensation for a sort of the vacuum within? If to use the word soul, let's say they are soulless. Are they just a shell, and so they require constant validation?
That's one way to say it. I think another way to say it is that they really feel very small. They just feel very small, and they don't want the world to know the truth about their smallness. And so they're putting up this masquerade of being an okay person, a normal person. They love words like normal and, all kinds of fitting in language. They want you to fit in. They want to fit in. They want everything to be normal, and all of that is masking their smallness.
Talking here with Dr. Eric Maisel, there is also a cultivating of an alternate reality. Authoritarians, cult leaders, say, don't trust your eyes and ears, don't trust the data, certainly don't trust scientists, don't trust my critics. I will define your normal. And within these borders, you're safe, everything's true, especially if I say or do it. Everybody else is lying. Common authoritarian tactic, right?
Sure. Clearly self-serving. We see the why of that. Nothing mysterious about inventing a universe where you are the head of it and everybody else must obey you and the rules of that universe, which you get to describe for the flock. You get to say what the rules are. And even if somebody else brings in a rule that wants to compete with your rule, you can just twist it. You can make love sound like hate and hate sound like love, and we know how language works. So yes, the short nod there makes perfect sense.
You're a student of Orwell. I have seen Orwell invoked. In fact, I have invoked Orwell in the years of late. When you look around, Dr. Eric Maisel, are there accurate, appropriate correlations between the work of Orwell and what you're seeing around you every day?
Well, I think the short answer is of course. Yeah, growing up, and I don't know why this was the case, but growing up, maybe because it was so soon after World War II and the Holocaust, and it was so clear, and the atomic bomb, and it was just so clear how dangerous human beings were. From the earliest times, I thought that there was only a very thin veneer of civilization over our species, that you could crack through that veneer very easily, that World War II that the Nazis were one example of how that veneer of civilization could be cracked easily. So the appearance of a Trump never surprised me. Horrified me, but I was not surprised by that because that person is always among us. And as I say, I think the veneer of civilization is actually paper thin.
What does that mean? I mean, are we on the precipice? Are we about to devolve?
I think we're always on the precipice. That isn't to say we will go over the precipice, but I do think that it's important for us to be aware that we're always on the precipice. I do think that I think all of us have to be activists in the service of those principles that we think are important, whether it's freedom or civil rights or whatever. We have to be doing our job. I don't think we can sit back and safely say, oh, our institutions will work or we've made progress. Progress is one of those super interesting words. The transcendentalists of the 18th and 19th century, the Emersons and Thoreaus, loved the word progress and kind of anointed America as the place of progress. And their image for us was the image of the upward spiral. I think we got seduced by that word, progress, and that image and that feeling that we were making progress in our institutions, in our rights, and what have you. I don't have that feeling about progress. Yes, we've made undeniable progress in one sense or another. But I've always felt that that progress was at risk. And so that's all I'm saying is I think that all of the advantages, all of the rights we've fought for and acquired are at risk at all times, not just with Trump, but at all times. And the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Yeah, Dr. Maisel, you got your work cut out for you. I mean, you are selling science in what is an alarmingly anti-science, a gleefully anti-science culture, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I have nothing to add to what you just said, except absolutely.
Does it keep you up at night? Are you sitting there going, holy cow, I mean, how we get here?
No, because, I believe in my own vision of naming our life purposes and then living them. And so I have my activist energy going most of the time, every day I'm on this mission. I keep coming back in my own mind to Eisenhower in the days before D-Day. And it does not matter to us whether he was depressed or anxious or this, that, or anything, or worried about civilization or anything. He just needed to get the invasion right. That was his job then. And I just feel like I have a job. I can't afford the indulgence of depression or anxiety or worry about the world or anything. Just have to do my work and, support my principles every day. I think that's the way to go.
I've been debating in my own life, limiting the avalanche of awfulness that pours into my eyes via Twitter and Facebook and the headlines. We're not wired for this, right? I mean, we're not wired for this constant explosion of terrible activity.
I don't think so. I watch no news. I'm on no social media. I don't have a cell phone. So that should speak volumes to how I see my place in the world.
Yeah, but then the criticism becomes, well, you're just in denial, or you're...
No, I'm working all day long. I'm not in denial about anything. I'm doing my job. I'm being of help. I'm just getting out of my own way and getting out of the world's own way and not needing to be bombarded by stuff I don't need to know. It's one thing if I need to know a fact so that I take some action. But if it's just stuff coming in about which I can take no action, that doesn't serve me to know.
So you have made a conscious effort to sort of eliminate the white noise as you are pursuing a targeted path.
A super conscious effort, and that's why I've had, I think 5 books come out this year. Because I'm not getting in my own way with that stuff. I'm not being seduced by it, because it can be a seduction. Because the work we want to do is often hard work, whether it's writing a novel or being an activist or whatever it is. It's hard work, and it's easier to check your email one more time or watch an episode of something or listen to the news. It's easier than actually wrestling with your novel, wrestling it into existence. So there are lots of seductions and lots of meaning substitutes and lots of flights from freedom available to us, and I'm not interested in taking them.
So is there a silver lining? Is there something we can leave the audience with? Some tool, perhaps?
Oh, sure. There's tons of silver linings.
I need
real.
it.
Love is real. Hugs are real. Sacrifice is real. People do good things. Tons of things. It's just that all of that can be overwhelmed by the bad stuff. But life isn't just darkness. There's plenty of light, and a lot of that light we have to generate for ourselves. You know, we may have to reach out and hug someone in order to have a hug, we may have to reach out and hug someone. So in order to get some of the benefits that are available in life, we may have to do some work to get those benefits, but they are abundantly available.
Dr. Eric Maisel, you've been so kind to have this conversation. His website, Eric Maisel, MAISEL.com. I will link it in the description box. For your time, for this conversation, for your expertise, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. For a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming Free Thought events and conventions, log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.